So we've obviously gotten a lot of Marvel news out of San Diego Comic-Con. While it wasn't a whole lot of new or earth-shattering information, it really kind of focused on a lot of announcements and release dates surrounding pre-existing material that had already been announced in one form or another, aside from the two Avengers films in all reality, which notably and conveniently leaves the Phase 6 slate suitably empty for Marvel and Kevin Feige just to take over the news cycle once again by announcing the rest of their Phase 6 slate. All of this during their Disney's upcoming D23 convention here in September, I believe it is. So that'll be good for them. So, despite that the showrunner has come out and confirmed that the show is still in development, one show that was noticeably absent from the Phase 5 and Phase 6 slate, like we get all of Phase 5 here, and we got this kind of tease of Phase 6, which I can almost on 99% assure all of this will be announced at D23, but I couldn't help but notice that one show was just noticeably missing from this entire slate so far, so it kind of throws like I said, all these announcements at Comic Con were primarily things we already knew that was in development, and we just kind of got new official, maybe updated release dates in some capacity, kind of nicely put out in the Phase 5 or 6 line, but we just forget about this show or something? It's very strange. I'm looking forward to this show, but I don't know. I just thought that was kind of odd. Now, the main thing I want to cover here in this video is when Kevin Feige is going to be introducing the X-Men. Is he going to announce a new X-Men or a mutant-centric film in that suitably empty Phase 6 slot? Or is he going to save it for maybe Avengers Secret Wars? And that would be a pretty good time to introduce the X-Men. But as I'll get into this video a little bit later, could Secret Wars be kind of ending the era of the Avengers and then kind of paving the way and allowing the spotlight to now shine on the X-Men? Now, ever since the Disney and Fox merger occurred, everyone's mind has immediately gone to, oh, X-Men! Where's all the X-Men? When's old faggot ball going to introduce the X-Men up in this here MCU? And since then, there has probably been anywhere from one rumor to 1,000 rumors about an X-Men character appearing in an MCU film or an X-Men character being seen on set of an MCU film, or Hugh Jackman being seen landing from a flight in Atlanta, and Marvel notoriously shoots most of their films in Atlanta. So Wolverine, ladies and gentlemen, Wolverine was confirmed to be in the X-Men, or most notably, I think, back when the picture of old Thanos here got released, he's got 3 claws, he's 3 scratch marks on his face, rather. It's got to be Wolverine. Wolverine confirmed in Infinity War, and so on, and so on. That's literally been the talk of the town for the last 5 years, right? Ever since this Disney acquisition came to be, everyone's only been ever talking about the X-Men. Now, when this Disney-Fox acquisition occurred, Kevin Feige was put on the spot at one point and was just asked point blank, what are you going to introduce the X-Men? What are you going to do with them? And he flat out said on record that he's got a 5-year plan. And after that, his 5-year plan is in place. And then after all that plays out, then he'll start thinking about introducing the X-Men or Fantastic Four or any sort of properties and IP that they absorb from Fox. All that is taking a back seat because he's got his 5-year plan and he's going to see that through. But now, more so than ever, the timeline really fits and is fairly evident now with, Secret Wars here being announced, that we're kind of at the culmination of this 5-year plan. As I alluded to before, could Avengers Secret Wars introduce the X-Men? Or will Secret Wars, like I said, be the end of this Avengers era and leave the door open for the MCU to prioritize X-Men, build up the universe with the X-Men characters just as he did with Iron Man way back in 2008? It's certainly possible. Now, a recent article was released by The Direct that kind of goes into why they think that the MCU cannot, not will not or won't be, but why they cannot introduce X-Men, any characters really. Well, not necessarily all characters, but they can't introduce a lot of the, titular characters of the X-Men like Wolverine, Professor Xavier, Cyclops, the core groups, because of existing contracts that are in place with the Fox franchise that came before it. Now, I don't really buy everything about that in this article because I've never heard of any contracts that are contingent upon X actor must play X role. Those contracts, like any sort of contracts made by a movie studio, is always there to suit the studio, not there to suit the actor. So what typically happens, like when you hear that, like, an actor in a Marvel franchise, and like notoriously, Joaquin Phoenix did not want to play Doctor Strange because he didn't want to sign a multi-film deal. Now, when that sort of thing happens, he's not obligated to technically like be Doctor Strange forever. It's an option. So the studio, if they made the first Doctor Strange movie, yes, Joaquin Phoenix would have been contractually obligated to come back for a second or third film, whatever his multi-feature, film deal was with them. But conversely, if that movie would have came out and he did just no one liked him. No one liked him as Doctor Strange in this weird multiverse, right? No one liked Joaquin's Doctor Strange. It's on Marvel Studios, contingency whether or not they want to bring him back. It's an option. So if they want him back, he signed the contract, so he does have to do it. But if they don't want him back, or they want to go in a different direction, they just want to get a new person, then they totally can. It's their property, it's their thing. So that's why I don't necessarily buy that, like, literally all of these old X-Men actors, it was built into their contracts to where they have to play those characters. That is really bizarre, and if that's true, then I want those agents. So, Hugh Jackman and, James McAvoy, Patrick Stewart, let me get in touch with your agents because 'cause they're a hell of a negotiating team. Jesus. So those contractual issues aside, the one thing that I've always noticed is everyone wants to focus on when the X-Men are gonna come into the MCU rather than how. Not so much like how are they gonna be introduced, just like in general on its own in the movie, like, well, what are they gonna do? Where's they gonna show up? Not like how in that sense, but how in regard to the lore and the history that comes along with the X-Men. Like their introduction into an ever evolving and ever connected Marvel Cinematic Universe as it stands now, that has gone through Infinity War or the whole Infinity Saga and is now nearing the end of this newly dubbed multiverse saga. How will the mutants fit into that when there's been zero mention of mutants up until Miss Marvel at this point, or the X-Men? So, like, there's so much history that comes with them. I'm very curious as to like how Feige will introduce the X-Men or mutants into this world when there's no fear or disdain from Homo sapien towards Homo superior. Now, to me, that's the biggest problem facing Kevin Feige and the MCU and, any like core, like, big X-Men fans such as myself. Because if you ignore all of that lore and history surrounding the kind of the societal and political problems that come along with X-Men and where they are within humanity at the time, you lose a lot of that really core stuff that builds their characters. Like Magneto's entire character development is absolutely contingent upon humanity versus Homo sapien. And Homo sapien, just regular old humans, they're completely afraid of mutants. They're completely against them. That's what like almost all of X-Men stories are about if it's not some big crossover. It's about the just how mutants are existing in the everyday world. And at this point in time, the MCU has almost gotten to a point where if you've seen the She-Hulk trailer recently, like superheroes are just everywhere. Now, I do think there's a potential that was shown in Miss Marvel with the DODC that maybe, like you had that rogue damage control agent who was just hell bent on hunting down Kamala and the other guy. I can't remember his name, but either way, the Kamran, there it was. But hunting them down just because they were powered individuals. So I could really see like if they really start leaning into that aspect, and they go into like now all of a sudden because there are so many just superpowered beings, mutant or otherwise, just existing in the world, and there are now these just like incel groups that are just starting to really turn against the heroes, and they really kind of emphasize and politicize that in some future MCU material. I could kind of see how they could weave it in. But that being said, when is that going to be and how? Because there's that still, if you start introducing that stuff now, you still lose a lot of the history and lore with mutants because mutants were supposed to have been around for a very long time. So we'll just have to wait and see, I suppose, what the master Kevin Feige comes up with, but I'm damn curious. So if we stick with Magneto here for a second, his origin itself as being a young Jewish child growing up in the World War II era during the Nazi regime, that can't really be done at this point because our present day 2020 era MCU, Magneto will be pushing 100 some odd years old at this point, or close to it, whatever it may be. Like, yeah, he'd be like what, 102 years old or something like that, depending on what age you actually want to make him as a child at the time. But nevertheless, it's semantics. But either way, you can't really stick with that unless they were lost in time or something. So you can't really have him being a Holocaust survivor or going through any of that and like that shaping him and seeing the darkness of humanity. And that's what kind of shapes his, from a very young age. He has this outlook on like against humanity because he's seen the pinnacle of evil from that society, the society of Homo sapiens, and what they've done to each other, and by virtue, what they do to mutants in the end. So while that's not the like that in general being set in that era isn't the most important thing, but if you don't have something like that in Magneto's origin, I don't know. What are you going to do at that point to really like shape him and convince us that he has this well warranted disdain towards humanity. You know what I mean? So it's like there's been some talk of people potentially maybe, maybe they could race swap them and put them in like the civil rights movement or something, which would be quite fitting in all honesty, because Stan Lee always said that the X-Men and Magneto and Charles in particular were kind of an allegory for the civil rights movement and both Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. So that would be quite fitting. So they could go something along those lines if they wanted to. And they could even go the route of having a more in universe explanation for some societal and political division or angst against Homo sapien and Homo superior, much like what was done with Baron Zemo and Sokovia during the Captain America Civil War. And I mean, there's plenty of examples of real world Homo sapiens, humans, being truly evil and just to other human beings. So, I mean, they could find some way to do that if they want to weave them in. And that's kind of my point about this is I feel like if you don't weave that sort of narrative in to just the X-Men and mutants in general, then they're just gonna be kinda just random powered people, and it's not I don't think it can be quite as, impactful, as from a storytelling standpoint, because you have to just start I mean, it's possible. It's definitely possible, like I said, they could start introducing this in like, with an in-world explanation, just kind of like they like I said, kinda hinted upon with the whole Miss Marvel thing, like, it's totally possible. They kinda did something like that already with Baron Zemo and Sokovia, like, so it's definitely possible. It would just take more time, I think, to kinda weave it in, and then you're saying that mutants just kinda happened now in present day as opposed to them being there for a long time, and then not to mention the whole apocalypse thing and Rama Tut, so it's like, was he around back then, or what are you gonna do to kinda twist those origins? It's all very interesting, like, and I don't envy Kevin Feige for having this job of making this all work and be cohesive, be truthful to the source material, adapt it obviously because the MCU adapts everything. It's nothing's ever one to one, and nor should it be really. But I do not envy him from being in this position, and I'm very curious and excited to see what he does decide to do with it, and I hope it turns out good. So there's really no right or wrong answer. It's all just about good characters and good stories. So as long as they're able to work in really good characters and really good stories, I'm gonna be on board. Some X-Men are some of my favorite characters in comics of all time. Like, I've always had a keen heart for Gambit. I don't know why. I just love Gambit. So I hope whoever they get to play Gambit was gonna be Channing Tatum. I like Channing Tatum, but I don't know if I ever really saw him as Gambit. I don't know. Ryan Gosling's been the kind of names been floated about, and there's been articles saying that Kevin Feige wants to get Ryan Gosling into the MCU. And then, goddamn it, I started thinking he might be a good Gambit. He could I don't know if he can do a Cajun accent, but he might be a good Gambit. And then there's been rumors about, Rogue being potentially maybe or her family showing up in, Miss the Marvels film, so we can stand maybe we'll see Gambit sooner rather than later. I don't know. So at this point, it really just does come down to the how. How, Sir Kevin Feige, are you going to introduce the mutants? And I'm not gonna lie, like, at this point I wouldn't even mind if he just held a big press conference and flat out just said, "Look, guys, When the MCU was created, it was in the a real world parameters in which we did not own the rights to X-Men. We did not own the rights to mutants in general. We didn't own the rights to Fantastic Four. They all belong to another company in Fox. So now that we've come this far, nearly 15 years and 30 plus MCU projects spread across films and television and all these things, there's no 100% perfect way or easy way to introduce the X-Men and all of mutant kind into the MCU world as it exists now, given those initial parameters. Like it's just unrealistic, guys. So without heavily adapting their origin stories and their histories, it's just going to be too complicated. So to be fully transparent in an effort to just focus on telling the best possible stories that we can in a way that we don't have to compromise our characters and the history that comes with them. We may need to retcon some of the events of the MCU. And from this point on, we're introducing the X-Men and we're going to weave in their rich history to the pre-existing parameters that we've defined into the MCU in the best and least confusing way that is humanly possible. So just stick with us. Don't worry too much about who, what, when, where, and why as the X-Men are introduced in these other films and within their own films. We will work all the characters and history out just the best we possibly can. So we just need you to just suspend your disbelief a little bit, just enough to overlook a retcon here and there. But just remember that these are movies, and we're just trying to tell compelling stories, damn it, much like they did with Terrence Howard. They recasted him, and then Don Cheadle walks in and they make a joke about it. They just say, "Yeah, it's me. Get over it." That's what they need to do. Like, I wouldn't even hate Kevin Feige if he just held a press conference, made up all that stuff there, and just said, "Guys, we're doing the X-Men. We can't really keep all their history if we don't retcon stuff that's already happened. So we might need to just deal with it and move on. It's just a movie. Get on with it." Yeah, I'm almost, it's such a daunting task to introduce them and make it be coherent without losing everything that comes along with them, that I wouldn't even be mad if he just wanted to do that. Because quite honestly, the MCU as it exists is a very complicated thing. You have these, like I said, there's like 30 some odd movies at this point soon, and then they're not even just movies, just properties in general across Disney Plus, television, whatever it may be. That's a daunting task to keep all that in order. There's like many book series that can't even follow their own canon within their same book. And like for the most part, Kevin Feige's been pretty goddamn successful keeping everything together and keeping everything coherent. So I really just, I'd be on board with it. It's just like, you want to introduce X-Men, Kevin Feige? You don't want to have to explain everything and, just reset everything or whatever. Just do it, my man. Like, I trust in you. You want one easy way out. The old X-Men continuity at Fox didn't exist. You had different actors coming in left and right. Stories would happen that just completely, they don't even reference the last film half the time. So, like, you can get a single out. You can just do it one time, man. I'm be fine with it. But goddamn, like I said, I just don't envy this situation because, like I said, this kind of in the Kenobi video. You're never going to please everyone. That's why this is a daunting job. No matter what he does, he can introduce X-Men in the best possible way, and people are still not gonna like it. There's gonna be something that somebody doesn't like. So I don't envy the man, but I am damn thankful for the man. Now, for those of you who don't know, Kevin Feige's been a producer in Hollywood, a lot longer than just the MCU. He got pretty much his start back on those original the X-Men 2000 days. He was I forget what his exact role was. He wasn't like the big producer behind it, but he worked on the first X-Men movie, and there's a funny story about how he was working with either a makeup stylist or a hairdresser or something, and he actually gave them a tip about how they should do Wolverine's hair. So they said, "Oh, since he's not wearing the mask, his hair should go up like that." So there's a really funny story about that. But the fact remains, one tidbit I want to leave you with here to ponder is, if Kevin Feige does introduce the X-Men in the Secret Wars, is there a chance? And let's also go out on a limb here and say, if Secret Wars is going to be like a big reset of the multiverse, kind of like, Crisis on DC's end, if it's gonna just reset everything in some way and just bring everything together, will Kevin Feige throw the biggest curveball ever and have one big just send off for the Fox X-Men franchise that he got his start on and bring back the cast of the original X-Men 2000 film when, Hugh Jackman, all of them, they all come back, they're all playing the original characters, Halle Berry, Storm, just everyone's back, and they stand in for the X-Men in the Secret Wars film, and then that's it. At the end, it's boom, there's a big reset, and, like, you see the new cast or something. I don't know, but maybe the new cast of X-Men gets introduced and the other ones there too because it's multiverse. But I just think because he got his start on X-Men, I think there's a really good chance that Secret Wars of all the movies could easily be the one that you just go crazy in the multiverse. And if you want a Hugh Jackman cameo, that'd be a good way to do it. And it'd be kind of poetic for him to do this big send off, introduce the X-Men, with a bang by bringing back the original X-Men where he kinda got his start on the film. I don't know, I thought that'd be kinda fun, but nevertheless, do you think that's even possible? What do you guys think about how, like, the how, like I was talking about in this video, like, what is the how? How would you like to see the X-Men done in the MCU? Would you want to just forego their entire history and introduce just completely new characters, like same obviously same characters, but completely new origin, have like a in-universe MCU origin? Because there's obviously other theories that people have had out there that I didn't touch on, like mutants were born because of the Thanos snap, like maybe that did it. Like it's like, but again, if you do that, then you lose out on all the history and everything that kind of comes with the X-Men from the comics. So you got to kind of retool it and rework it. Not that it won't work, it's just that you just don't have a lot of the other stuff. You got to find like Magneto in particular. You got to find something happened to him when he was younger that just shaped his outlook on humankind. And if you don't have that, I don't know if you necessarily are still Magneto. You're just a kind of a mad guy at that point. You know what I mean? Like you really need that thing that just like that paves the road for him in particular. But I mean, they could do whatever they want. You never know. But let me know what you guys think, and I'll see you guys in the next video.